A group of U.S. senators were in Ottawa today to meet with Prime Minister Mark Carney and some of his cabinet. A meeting those senators praised as constructive and positive.
We have a 5,000-mile long border. That's a long border. But our friendship is a lot longer. And there's no way, in my view, that any temporary bump in the road can become a permanent bump in the road. And I think that was really clear today.
Industry Minister Mélanie Joly was one of those ministers and joins us now. It's nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Peter.
I hear him talking about urgency. I hear people saying they're encouraged out of these meetings, but still nothing concrete, obviously. What is it going to take, and what steps are we in the midst of to get an actual deal to end these tariffs?
Okay, so first and foremost, this is our utmost priority to get to a trade and security partnership with the U.S. Minister LeBlanc was in Washington this week. We were all in the Oval Office 2.5 weeks ago, and we are constructive. We are in good faith. And this is why it's important also to meet with the U.S. senators to understand two things. What is the dynamics they're going through in the U.S. and how we can work together to ultimately get to a better place. So we've been, for now a couple of weeks, working on many fronts. Yes, negotiating directly with President Trump, with his team, but also understanding that U.S. senators, so basically the Senate, is also an important piece of our lobbying to get to a good place. And that's why the meeting today was really important.
And that's why it's important to have, a Republican, certainly a Republican who's in the inner circle with Trump.
Of course, and we talk to everybody, Peter.
In a meeting like that. But at the end of the day, this trade dispute will be resolved not by them, not by him, but by one man in the Oval Office, right?
Well, of course. And we know that neither you or I or everybody watching us at home is in the mindset of President Trump.
No.
But my job in that meeting was really to explain what are the consequences in Canada of these U.S. tariffs. I was in Oshawa meeting folks at the GM plant yesterday, really understanding what's the consequences for workers and what is the thinking of management. I was in Bécancour in the aluminum sector in Quebec last week. So really working on what's the reality on the front lines of this economic war, this trade war with the U.S. And giving really the impacts, yes, in Canada, but also in the U.S. And having these very frank conversations with these senators that nearly all of them are I think all of them are coming from, except from Tim Kaine in Virginia,
right.
comes from, border states.
Yeah. They
They know it. That's also why they're here. They're hearing that, on the ground in their own states. So that's why I think being the new industry minister, it was interesting to see how much basically their own businesses are feeling the blunt of what decision was taken by the White House.
In my conversation with Kevin Cramer, he brought up a couple of times the notion of the Golden Dome.
Yeah.
But it is seen through this lens of that's the increase in military spending. That's getting us closer to the 2% target of spending, I suppose. Is that part of the give and take and is it as explicit as that we're willing to sort of join you in this missile defense venture if we can start getting some traction and movement on the trade file? So
my job, Peter, is not to negotiate in the public space.
Sure.
You're not surprised by my answer.
I am not.
But of course, our investments in defense, and that will also be my job as industry minister, working with our fantastic new defense minister, David McGuinty, is to create jobs at home. Because we will invest in the defense sector to get to 2% really, really quickly, and to even go further than that, because that's what NATO colleagues are asking us. When I was at NATO a month and a half ago, Marco Rubio said, hey guys, we need to get to 5%, while the US is still at 3.5. So we need to increase our military spending, but we need to create jobs in Canada. And so I want to work with the defense minister, supported of course by the PM, the Prime Minister, to make sure that we can provide new opportunities for people in the manufacturing sector, so in the auto sector, in the aerospace sector, in tech and AI. So we've never used necessarily our procurement to support our fantastic women and men serving us here at home and abroad to create more jobs. This is not, we've been over-dependent on the U.S. So we're willing to have conversation with the U.S. on how we can have that security partnership. But our priority, knowing that we're too dependent on the U.S. on the economic front, is to create jobs at home.
That creating jobs requires investment. And right now, investment is not coming to Canada. And in a lot of ways, it's being drawn out. And I talk to people, and I'm sure you talk to the same people, who say, everything else is noise. That's what Donald Trump wants. He wants investment that might go to a new line or a new production here in Canada in 6 years or whatever it may be. He wants that in the United States instead. It doesn't cost us jobs now, but it will cost us jobs in the future. How do you sort of counter that? And how do you inject the sort of certainty that businesses and investors need to build here now?
Well, I think, Peter, you're asking just the right question. And that's why, I know geopolitics. I used to be the foreign minister. This was a passion. But what we're seeing now is new economic blocks are being organized in the world. And the rules of trade are being rewritten or have yet been rewritten. So, because there's so much uncertainty, not only in Canada, by the way, look at what's going on in the EU, look at what's going on, in the Gulf, everywhere. There is a global competition to attract investments. That's exactly what President Trump did last week when he was in Gulf states, in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and also in Qatar to talk about investments. We need to do that. Right. I'll be doing that, of course, working with the Prime Minister, because we can invest even more in the energy sector. We have an opportunity more than ever. We know we can build the right infrastructure. We know we can also invest, of course, in defense. And we know we can also invest in AI. So I look forward to having these conversations. Canada's reputation is really good around the world, but sometimes we've been showing too much red tape. So I have 60 days to come up with a plan to cut red tape within my ministry. I will work with my colleagues and Minister LeBlanc particularly to have a concierge approach to people that want to invest in Canada and that can know that within a short time, with a lot of speed, they can get their permitting and they can get to actually their business needs, and we will be open for business. This is the Carney approach.
I spoke with Christine Lagarde from the ECB yesterday, who is saying there is an opportunity here. A lot of what you're saying, but then we also got into the fact that Canada, the Bloomberg survey came out this morning showing we're probably already into the slip into a recession in Q2 and in Q3. They see in Europe the economy will slow to less than 1%, and that it's harder to execute a lot of that in a slowing economy. It's easy to do that when things are going great. How do you sort of balance doing all of that at a time when the economy is kind of stuck in the mud?
Well, I think that people will look at where to invest capital in the world.
Right.
And they don't want to be overexposed. They don't want to invest only in one country, one jurisdiction. They will look at, okay, where should I, make sure that I invest in a place where it's stable, where I know I can, basically have a good return on my investment, and that I have a long-term vision. We have everything the world needs. We have the natural resources, the talent, we have everything. And so that's what I'll be working on. And at the same time, it's a new type of diplomacy. It's a diplomacy that is not necessarily state to state, but it is state to business leaders.
Right.
And geopolitics is one thing, and you'll see that business will be aligning to geopolitics. That's why I was talking to you about these economic blocks.
Right.
And so I think that I can do that work, working, of course, with my colleagues, and make things happen in the country. It is a really big challenge, but I'm convinced that we are able to overcome it.
Is the message I'm hearing from you, is this about right? That it's the world's in trouble. Canada's in trouble too, but we might be the safest port in a storm, as it were?
Of course. I profoundly believe it. And I've heard it in my past job, but also I have lots of CEOs right now that are saying, I'm interested. So I've been in the job for a week now, but I'm already having constructive conversations. And I need to, make sure that I'm able to give them arguments, and I'm convinced I'm able to, because we have the most economic Prime Minister in decades, and this is our utmost priority.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Industry Minister Mélanie Joly.
We had a good discussion talking about tariffs, talking about ways in which we are cooperating militarily and in the national security space, talking about the importance of the economic relationship that we have, and we hope that this meeting will continue very positive discussions.
One of those lawmakers was North Dakota Republican Senator Kevin Cramer. This week, he passed a resolution in the Senate reaffirming the U.S.-Canada relationship, stressing it's a critical partnership. Cramer was also with President Trump, announcing the Golden Dome, and is now in Ottawa as co-chair of the Canada-U.S. Interparliamentary Working Group. Senator Cramer joins me now. Senator, thank you for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
You said your word of the day is encouraged. What is it about these meetings today that led you to think that we can move forward? This isn't a more permanent problem for our two countries.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And what encourages me as much as anything probably was the meeting with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Carney he's obviously a serious leader. He recognizes the challenge of the moment, but I think also the opportunity of the moment. I think much like Donald Trump, he's a transformational leader. And I think the two of them understand each other. I'm encouraged by the takeaways from the meeting between the President and the Prime Minister just recently, and then to meet with the cabinet officials that we met with. Again, I don't want to oversimplify the challenge, but there is more than a little bit of will to come to some sort of resolution in the short term that would lead to a broader discussion in the long term.
Let me ask about that challenge, because I get the sense that there is a will among some people to reach a deal, but at the end of the day, it's the president who will make these decisions, and I don't get the sense that there's a lot of will there to bring down the tariffs and rethink the trade strategy that we've been seeing over the last few months. Where do you see things progressing from here then?
Well, I think there is a will in the White House, because, for example, just the other day I was with him when he announced his Golden Dome, because Senator Dan Sullivan and I are the co-sponsors of the Golden Dome Act in Congress. We were there for that announcement. A couple of times, if not 3 times, during the announcement, the President referred to Canada's interest in Golden Dome. And why I take encouragement from that is it was a respectful reference. It wasn't cynical in any way. It wasn't joking. He was very serious. I think he was encouraged by that. To see Canada have a leader now who's leaning into national security, recognizing that the adversary is not the United States and the United States adversary is not Canada, but we do have joint adversaries, particularly in China, and so I'm just encouraged by some of the rhetoric that I see and the commitment to leaning into this process. I've also talked to members of the cabinet who are enthused about trade deals, particularly with our biggest trading partner and our closest neighbor and dearest friend, Canada. So I really do believe that we can get by this and we can get through it in the short run, and hopefully in that process create momentum going into a much longer discussion about a USMCA extension and expansion.
I was down in Washington when Prime Minister Carney went to meet with President Trump in the Oval Office, and there's a really important, I think, moment in that meeting where the President was asked, is USMCA dead? The CUSMA, we call it in Canada, USMCA, you call it in the United States. And he said, and I'm going to quote here, "No, it was actually very effective, but people haven't followed it. That's been the problem. People haven't followed it." And it felt to me like there was an opening there, that the President was saying, let's put the problems back through the lens of USMCA or CUSMA and find a way through this. Am I overreading that, or do you think there is a potential to try to get this deal done through that lens?
Yeah, no, I think your observations are astute, and I think that you're right on point. Remembering that in 2026, of course, is the review. It's scheduled as part of the deal that the President himself helped create, and to sort of elevate that and even escalate that a little bit, I think is what we might be talking about. But I do think there is this short-term challenge, particularly with the tariffs on steel and aluminum, the 232 tariffs that you're all very familiar with. If we can deal with that quickly and come up with a framework, much like he did with the United Kingdom. The UK deal that they struck is an 8-page memorandum of understanding, basically a blueprint going forward. There's no reason we couldn't have something like that with Canada.
America's ambassador to Canada told my colleague Catherine Cullen on the House today, I'm just going to read the quote here, that it's time to move on from the president's 51st state comments and urge Canadians not to dwell on it. What do you make of those comments, and how much damage do you think had been done through that?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, Peter, because living in North Dakota, having family in Canada, having farmers that farm both sides of the Manitoba and North Dakota border, this stuff gets fairly personal to us. It's not just simply a sort of a national jab, if you will. I understand the insult of it, if you will. I'm hard to insult. I don't offend very easily, but clearly several people are. It's interesting, at one point I was meeting with some Canadian business leaders who said, well, I don't know, we find it kind of flattering that we could be part of the United States, but to the constituents out there, the farmers, the ranchers, the factory workers, the retailers, the tourist industry people throughout the western part, at least, of the country, they were genuinely hurt by it. I get that. I agree with Ambassador, with our ambassador. I think Peter's right on point. But at the same time, we can't just simply ask Canadians not to be offended. We have to stop the offenses as well, and that would be my message to Americans.
And there has been a change in tone since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. We haven't heard certainly as much of those threats. You had a comment earlier in the day talking about meeting. It's the first time U.S. delegation has met with the Prime Minister in 5 years, but that you had said you had never had a good conversation with the previous Prime Minister. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, so I was urging the previous Prime Minister to step up his country's NATO commitment as a charter member of NATO. You know, Canada is very near the bottom, in fact, only under some very small countries in terms of meeting their NATO obligations. And he seems rather proud of that fact rather than sort of embarrassed by it. And I think, this is an area that is a legitimate difference between the United States and Canada. And to have now Prime Minister Carney sort of leaning in to that obligation, I think sends a really good message to President Trump and to the United States, and frankly to all the freedom-loving people that are part of the NATO alliance. And so I just see that as another one of those sort of healing, encouraging moments.
I can imagine a lot of people are listening to this or watching this interview right now, nodding along and saying they're hearing all the right things about the Canada-U.S. relationship, and they see some progress that they'd like to build on. But at the same time, they might wonder why you didn't join your Republican colleagues who voted to end the national emergency that was declared to impose these tariffs in the first place. Why didn't you vote alongside them to end that national emergency and try to get our trade relations back on track?
Well, because quite honestly, this kind of geopolitical movement is really the responsibility of the executive branch. I'm not going to step in the middle of the president's negotiations and his strategy early in that strategy. We'll see what happens, several months from now or a year from now, as things progress. That bill is always live. That resolution is always live. It's able to be brought up at any time for another vote. But in the meantime, I don't think I should step on Donald Trump's remember what he ran on. It's not like this is a big shocker. He ran on tariffs as a tool for leveling the trade playing field around the world. So I just think it was too early to do something like that, and we need to let this play out a bit.
There are talks like you guys had today. We know that Dominic LeBlanc is down holding his own meetings in the Capitol this week. What are the next steps, sir? Where do you think we go, and what's on the agenda of those? Is it like, let's deal with the steel and aluminum tariffs first? Is it let's move up the CUSMA renegotiations? What are these next steps that you see?
I think dealing with those 232 tariffs you talked about is the urgent matter, quite honestly, and as well as sending some signals that Canada is serious about moving forward into the national security investment, if you will, and to include, by the way, Golden Dome, which I think is a wide open door of invitation for Canada to step up, because let's remember, you really can't protect the United States from missiles coming over the Arctic without being in the Arctic. And I think that it's an obvious relationship, an opportunity that is mutually beneficial to both countries, both from a national security standpoint and an economic collaboration standpoint. So I'd see those two things as probably the next steps to setting the stage for a longer negotiation.
All right, Senator Cramer, we appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer.